There we go. So in the chat now, you should see the link to our donation page. I will explain that here in a second, but you can go there to donate. The link is also in the description of this stream, and that should be live and active right now. And the progress bar in the bottom center of the screen is how much we have currently donated. I don't actually know if it automatically updates. Let's find out. Well, until somebody donates, I guess we won't know. But that's okay. So here's the deal. I have a lot of stuff prepared, but I am obviously wanting to take this discussion in a way that is most helpful for you all, because this is not for me. This is just sort of what I was anticipating what might be useful to everyone. So real quick, I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the organization I am fundraising for right now. Who they are, what they're doing, those sorts of things. And then we'll sort of go into how I go about deciding if a nonprofit is worth giving to, and if they are doing what we think they're actually doing. The short version is it's kind of difficult to tell, but there are some things you can look at, and that's what I would like to focus on today. So, who are we fundraising for? Let me show you real quick. So, this is an organization called Ukrainian Volunteer Service. They are relatively new in terms of they haven't been around for years and years and years, but they are someone that I know personally. If you Google them, you're not going to find a lot. One of the reasons for this is their website is, as far as I can tell, only in Ukrainian. You can auto-translate it up here. Pros and cons to using Google auto-translate on a website like this. What I can tell you from this is they have a few things that allow you to know what they're doing, but again, it's all in Ukrainian, so it's not going to be super helpful. The most helpful thing to look at is this article from National Endowment for Democracy that sort of talks about what this organization is and what they do. They're based out of Odessa, pretty much. That's where most of the organizers are, Odessa-based organization. And to give you all some context, I know Anna Bondarenko semi-personally, professionally. We've met a couple of times virtually. Since I've been in the States, we've had some Zoom meetings. And I'm also in contact with her assistant, who helped me set this whole thing up. So I have a direct connection to them. And I can tell you that what they're doing is multifaceted. They're in a very sort of dangerous area. So they're doing a lot of things to defend their own home country. A big piece of that is humanitarian efforts. So they are, this paragraph here is a quotation from Anna Bondarenko directly, talking about IDPs, which is internally displaced persons. Think refugees, but within their own country. So people who have been displaced within their own country due to the conflict are moving around. So this service is providing food, help with relocation, shelter, and a lot of other types of support to those individuals. That's what these funds are going to. I am aiming currently for about $1,000, which goes a pretty long way for them. Depending on how successful we are, we might be able to adjust that, but That's the goal right now. I don't want to spend too much time talking about them necessarily because there's a bigger topic here that we've all sort of shown up for. But if you are interested in helping, I would encourage you to check out the donation page linked in the description of this. I did test this portal. Wait for Pay is not one most Americans are going to be familiar with. It is a Ukrainian site. They do take a commission, but it's only like 2%. And since it is a Ukrainian site, that actually translates to 100% of your donation goes straight to Ukrainians anyway. So you're supporting Ukrainian digital infrastructure and funding platforms, as well as supporting this organization via this fundraiser. So helping Ukrainian volunteer service in their efforts to support, especially, I don't want to say marginalized groups, but groups that need a little bit more help, elderly, disabled populations, those sorts of groups that need help relocating, need supplies, all sorts of basic things that become very difficult to do when you're in the middle of a war zone. So anything and everything counts. I will also be making my own contribution to them. But this page is for you to, if you would like to support and share out. Here it is. So with that, I have way too many things of this page open. With that sort of explained, I hope that all makes sense. If you have additional questions about this organization, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah, so the support, it's one of those things where the reason I mentioned that about the supporting their digital infrastructure and the fees. Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. The reason I mentioned it is a lot of people are turned off by payment transaction fees, and I can understand why. You know, if you're giving to an organization, you don't want $3 of your $100 to go to PayPal or whoever it is. You want $100 to go to the organization. In this case, 100% isn't going to go to this org, but 100% is going to Ukrainians because it's a Ukrainian-controlled platform. That's why I bring it up. Otherwise, sometimes these fees are just something we have to live with when donating. At least it doesn't charge us extra. Well, that's what I'll say about that structure. Let's talk the bigger topic, which is how do we know who we're giving to and if it's a good choice? Like I said, the short answer is it's not easy. It is incredibly easy to be caught in the weeds when evaluating nonprofits. I mean, even making notes for this, I found myself sort of going down rabbit holes because there's so much, there's so many layers to it. And nonprofits are a world of gray area. So I'll say that up front, and we'll make the best of it. I will present my methods for how I go about it and try to give you all some tools to do the same. Sounds like solid rationale for supporting the organization, including the admin fee. Glad to hear that. I mean, I think it makes sense to me. I can explain, hopefully this, as we continue, will sort of explain why it makes sense to me. But we will see. So most of you know me already. If you're tuning in and you don't know who I am, and for anybody watching this back later, so I lived and worked in Ukraine for 4 years. I have a background in student development, youth development, and from there sort of transitioned into NGOs, also known as non-governmental organizations, which are effectively the equivalent of nonprofits if you're anywhere not in the United States. So then transitioned into American nonprofits. I have a master's degree in nonprofit management. The master's degree focused more on the American context, but as someone with an international background, I sort of did a little bit of both in my studies. And so that, along with the fact that I speak both Russian and Ukrainian, put me in a unique position to evaluate the Ukrainian situation specifically. So what I'm trying to do here is sort of share the overlap of my expertise with everyone else. I don't call myself an expert as a pride trip. I do consider myself an expert in that I am trained in both nonprofits and Ukrainian context. I have real experience and training and insight into these topics. So I'm not just blowing a lot of hot air out into the internet, trying to present what expertise I can. Again, because there's so much gray area, a lot of this is going to end up being my professional opinion. Other nonprofit experts might have other opinions. This is mine, based on, again, the overlap of nonprofit training and Ukrainian experience and expertise. So that's the setup. I will field questions as we go, and we'll hopefully accomplish something. So the number one question that I have going up is, I will probably multiple times throughout this use the term vetting, right? So what is vetting and why do we do it? Vetting is basically just the process of checking to make sure something is suitable. In this case, what we mean is, does this nonprofit organization do the thing that I want to support? And will my money do what I think it will do? That second piece is a little bit more complicated, but it is worth talking about. So screen share here doesn't really help us much. The short version of evaluating nonprofits is that you kind of have to understand how nonprofits function. And I'm starting there because most people don't understand how nonprofits function. And I'm not faulting anyone for that. Most people who start nonprofits and sit on the boards of nonprofits don't understand how nonprofits are designed to function. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because not knowing what you're doing doesn't mean you can't do good work. It just complicates things, especially in situations like this, when all of a sudden a whole lot of people are paying attention to an issue and there's so many voices screaming at them to go various and disordered directions. So nonprofits, the easiest way I can explain it, function similar to businesses in that they have a brand and they are trying to sell you their brand. They rely on things like name recognition to bring in funding. That is normally fine because you have to market your brand to grow. If people don't know who you are, they're not going to support you, right? So whether we like the overly emotional Sarah McLachlan, advertisements, they work. They get people to pay attention to you and they bring in money. That is a version of a nonprofit selling its brand. So Organizational Management 101 tells us you have to have a brand, you have to sell. It doesn't matter if it's for-profit, doesn't matter if it's nonprofit. The thing that I will say about that is relying on the brand itself only works to a point. And here in the Ukrainian context, I don't think it works very well at all. Sarah is the worst. I'm not saying I'm a fan of Sarah McLachlan ads. I don't know anything about her as a person, but that style of nonprofit advertising is not my favorite. We can talk more about why that's so common, but I'm not going to focus on it for now. Okay, so nonprofits have a brand. They're trying to sell you their brand. Why does this matter for Ukraine? I've talked about it a little bit already, but the elephant in the room here is Red Cross. I'm not going to initially explain why that's such a big deal, because again, there's so many layers to it. It's hard to do it in a short amount of time, in one or two sentences. Right? We have to look at several layers and understand how the Red Cross is organized, what they're doing, how they're presenting themselves, and then ultimately try to understand how our money fits into all of that. So the elephant in the room is the Red Cross. I'm going to touch on that, and we will be talking about it. So the brand, okay, this is going to continue on with my initial train of thought. When a nonprofit sells their brand, we miss out on some very important details. If you're relying on name recognition from brands, it's not a bad way to operate, because we don't have time to go through and analyze every single organization that we see an advertisement for, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, government organization, doesn't matter. We don't have time to deep dive all of their websites. And a lot of people, including myself, depending on what you're looking at, we wouldn't know how to evaluate what it is. That's what I'm trying to help with today on the nonprofit side. The problem with relying on name recognition for brands, especially international organizations, is those big organizations like the Red Cross get tons of donations every time a big event like this happens. But if you trace the money from donor to expenditure by the organization, and there's several steps along that path, a lot of times it doesn't actually end up where we want it to go. The basic gist of the Red Cross is that has been happening with Red Cross donations. Again, it's a very complicated thing, so I can't exactly explain where all the money is going immediately, but hopefully over the course of this, we'll kind of uncover that. So taking Ukraine as an example, since that's what prompted me to do this today. Big name organizations may or may not be providing direct aid to the people who need it. I'm going to skip over some of the examples I had written. So when you're donating, you have to think about a couple of things before you do so. All right. So this is one example of a fundraising page, right? This is one that I set up, so I can vouch for it. But let's say you come across something that is wanting to fundraise for a specific cause. The main idea of vetting a nonprofit is we want to be able to trace the organization to direct beneficiaries of service. In other words, we want to be able to trace the Red Cross, as an example, or the Ukrainian Volunteer Service to direct delivery of some good or service to Ukrainian people suffering from war. Okay. Sounds simple enough. It's not always. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple. The reason we want to do this is by connecting the dots from the organization to the people on the ground. We are ensuring that we are actually helping the cause and not just the organization. Not that helping the organization is inherently bad, right? The Red Cross does help people. as a simple statement. They do. But how they go about it, especially in emergency contexts like this, is questionable. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about some easy steps that we can all take, some of which you might have heard of and you might be doing already, some of which you may not know, and I'm going to get into some more and more complicated layers as we go. The vetting process can be pretty simple. For examples like this one, it's very easy for us to know that it is a good organization. Okay, because my first recommendation, the first vetting option you should go through is if someone you trust vouches for the organization. Okay, that can be a volunteer in the organization. It can be someone with a direct line of communication with that organization. It could be someone who has partnered with them in the past. Or it can be someone who has expert level knowledge of the situation, or someone who even works for the organization. I say work for the organization last because a person who works for the organization might not be fully honest with you. They probably will be, but there is a chance that they are also trying to sell their brand. So you just got to keep that in mind. It's not a disqualification, because they are still a very good source if you trust the person to give you real insight. And plus, in my experience, most people will be very honest with you. Most nonprofit employees, I would say, care more about the cause than they do about the organization. So they're not going to give you some BS about what the org is doing if that's not actually what the org is doing. If they're not a good org to give to, they're probably going to tell you that. But just keep that in mind. Okay. It's also worth keeping in mind that some employees might be jaded. Right? If you work for a place, you see all the behind the scenes stuff that drives you up the wall every day. So some people might give you a overly negative review of an organization instead. Not the majority, but it's possible. So for this fundraiser, right, for this one, I actually meet two of these criteria. I am a person who is working with, has a direct line of contact with the Ukrainian Volunteer Service, and I have an expert level knowledge of the Ukrainian situation. I also have professional contacts who can vouch for this organization, and that's actually how I got connected with them in the first place. Okay. So let's say you don't have someone that you can ask. You all have me, lucky you, but let's pretend that you don't have someone that you can ask, or for anyone who is watching and who knows me and can reach out to me. Let's say that you come across a new organization or a new fundraising campaign for an organization that you're not familiar with, and you want to give, you're planning on giving, maybe you can't get in touch with me, or you don't have time to check, or you ask me and I say, I have not heard of them. That's not immediately a reason to not give, right? You don't have to have a personal connection or someone who can vouch for them in order to give. So what do? One thing you can do is, especially in situations like Ukraine, you're going to come across these hub websites. That's an informal term. It's just what I call them. Websites like this one. Support Ukraine was, in the initial days of the invasion, this was the site that I was sending out to everyone as a place to go. And my basic messaging was, you can pick based on what you want to give to. This is a good collection of organizations to choose from. The astute among you will notice Red Cross is in here. I'll come back to that in a second. Okay. Now, what I did while checking these was I went through my basic process as quickly as I could. It was sort of a watered down version of the things I normally check, that I learned from a master's program. But I checked in on World Central Kitchen. I checked in on SOS Ukraine, checked in on United Help Ukraine, checked in on Come Back Alive. This is the actual Ukrainian government set up this one, so this is a very reliable one. And what I basically found was this website, whoever put this together, did their homework well enough. They had done enough to get this together to know that this was a decent collection of organizations. As the recommender of the organization questions, what do you know about the org? What do you find kind of work they do directly in the community? What do their financial? Yes. So that is an excellent way to go about it. If you come across and I appreciate that Jessica also went through the master's program with me, so she knows as much, if not more, than I do about nonprofits. When you come across these fundraising pages, you can ask the organizer. If there's a way to contact them, I would definitely ask. All of those questions that you put in the chat. What do you know about the org? What kind of work do they do directly in the community? What is their mission? Do you agree with it? Do you align with it? These are all excellent things to ask. Sometimes when looking at these fundraising pages or these hub websites, you might need to search a bit to find stuff. There's going to be different things, and if you're finding a fundraiser organized by someone you don't know, I would press pause. There are politicians and celebrities who are always going to support things, and rather than giving to individual fundraising pages organized by people you don't know, I would try to focus on the organizations themselves, because it cuts out the risk of giving to someone who's gonna basically steal your money. There are a lot of scammers that pop up in emergency situations, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind. The third vetting option that I would recommend when you're looking to donate is you need to be looking at the appeal on the donation page itself and the website. You follow this up by checking with news articles. Now, this is a multi-step process, but it doesn't take too long most of the time. And if it does take too long, that is actually a warning flag. You want these checks to be quick and easy, more or less. Okay, you can deep dive as much as you want if you have the time. But if you're just looking to give and sort through all the noise, if an organization is making you click on way too many links to find what you're looking for, press pause. So what are we looking for? If I'm going to say press pause if they're making you click through too many things, I got to tell you what we're looking for. The short answer is specific information. We are looking for specific information about how they're using funds. In a situation like Ukraine, we want to know, how are they using the funds to help Ukrainians? Okay. I also want to know, are they providing updates on the aid provided, on the situation that they're helping with? Are they giving any actual statistics? Or are they just making broad claims like, we're giving people food? Cool. How many people? Where? Are you in Ukraine? Are you in Poland? Are you in Moldova? Where? You want to know if the information is general or specific. And if you can, another thing to look for is funding source. That's one of the more complicated ones to look for, but effectively you want to see if they are reliant on donors or if they get government funding or grants. A lot of organizations actually aren't going to tell you this, which is why you kind of have to go into a next level of checks for this. It's just something to look for. If you can verify that they're donor funded, you found out an important piece of information. Okay, so let's go through an example of looking for this kind of stuff. Let's take a look here at World Central Kitchen. So I'm going to click here, luckily. By the way, hold on. Pause. Everyone pause. Okay, I paused. World Central Kitchen, you'll see on this page there's a donate button. I wouldn't click that. You could, because most likely what it's going to do is take you straight to their donate page. Cool. The problem with this donate page is it is their general organization's donation page. So we have done zero checking. We have not actually verified that for the purpose of Ukraine, they're doing stuff. Now, if you are just donating to an organization in normal everyday time, this is not a bad place to start. But I would still not give to this page without clicking around their website a little bit more. So instead, what I would do if you're on a hub site like this, or Google or whatever it is, just visit their main webpage. See, it has a visit here. And this link, because it's put together by someone focusing on Ukraine, takes you to their Ukraine-centric page. So you can kind of scroll through here and you see immediately with their fancy formatting, and see how that got darker. Look how fancy that is. You can see immediately brief summary and then a description of what they're doing. Pedestrian border crossing in southern Poland. It's not as specific as it could be, but it's not bad. Began serving hot, nourishing meals within hours of the initial invasion, blah, 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 blah. Additionally, we are supporting local restaurants preparing meals in cities across Ukraine, including Odessa, Lviv, Kyiv. Also on the ground, serving thousands of meals every day in Romania, Moldova, and Hungary. Okay. At a very basic level, they've told us what we need to know. We could ask way more questions, but they have told us that they're working in Poland. They're helping Ukrainian refugees specifically, and they have Ukrainian partners. Ideally, we would want to verify all of that, but verifying Ukrainian partners is actually very difficult to do. So difficult that I wouldn't recommend going down that rabbit hole. This page in and of itself was enough for me to look at it and go, okay, I'll keep them on my radar. At this initial stage, that's about all you can do. If you're comfortable giving at this stage, based on this information, I would say World Central Kitchen, not a bad place to go. Keep in mind, this is a very simple set of checks. It's just what I look for because a lot of pages don't even give that information. So that's sort of the very basic initial level how can we make sure this org doesn't totally suck? That's pretty much what that is. So we can move on from World Central Kitchen, and we can kind of talk a little bit about Red Cross. Initially, I would have said Red Cross is not a bad place to give. I don't like them because of discussions and things we looked at in our master's program. I'm not a huge fan of them. But as I said, they do stuff. They do have an impact, and they're huge. Organization size is something to consider because if you give to a small organization, a tiny little community organization, they may not have the capacity to implement that level of programming. And by that level, I mean an increased level of programming proportionate to the funding that they're receiving. So like if a really tiny organization gets an influx of donations, who's going to spend that money? right? If they get a 500% increase in donations overnight, they don't have the people for that. They might be able to find a use for it, but you want to get in touch with those really tiny orgs if you can. So tiny orgs are not the worst, but you want to make sure that they have the capacity to implement a surge in programming proportionate to the funding that you're receiving. But really big organizations are not necessarily better. Big organizations can be good because they have a lot of capacity. So when I did a fundraiser a couple weeks ago for direct relief, one of the things I looked at was the size of their organization. They're pretty big. That told me that they have the capacity to do a lot. They have a lot of employees. They have a large network. They can do some stuff. Red Cross is actually so big that it has become a problem. Jessica, you are helping. I just think it's funny that you can sum up like 20 minutes of me rambling in like 2 seconds. But anyone who knows me knows that that's pretty much what talking to me is like all the time. I'm proud of who I am. I'm a guy who rambles. I'm just hoping these ramblings are helpful. So Red Cross is so big that it becomes an issue. I guess I'll go into this now. I might as well, since that's one of the burning questions we all have. Red Cross actually decentralized. Okay, for those of you not familiar with decentralization, it's basically a concept of taking funding and governance structures and splitting them up. I don't actually recall the exact history of the Red Cross and how they were initially structured. But what I know about the Red Cross now is there are different Red Cross chapters in different locations. If you just, as an example, Google Red Cross, the one that pops up, based on my location probably, is American Red Cross. American Red Cross isn't doing anything for Ukraine. They might claim they are, but look at their website. Again, this is why I always check the main website. If they were focusing on Ukraine right now, we would see Ukraine mentioned without having to scroll or click on anything. They're not mentioned. Now, American Red Cross, I believe, does have international volunteers, and they might be going to Ukraine. But as we continue to click around on Red Cross's website, we will begin to see how difficult it is to verify that. Okay, and I'm going to stop myself here and say I am not bashing the Red Cross. I am not trying to say never give to them. I'm not trying to say they're the worst organization in the world. I am trying to put in perspective the priorities that we should have when giving in a situation like Ukraine. Okay, and so Red Cross, to circle back to one of my initial points, Red Cross is relying on brand recognition. They want you to think, oh, I know the Red Cross. They're good. Here's my money. That's the entire thought process they want you to have. And it works because brand recognition is effective. It's the same reason why you're more likely to buy Kellogg's cereal than some off-brand with a squirrel on it. I would buy a cereal with a squirrel on it because squirrels are awesome. But most people are going to buy Tony the Tiger. That's Kellogg's, right? I don't remember. Point is, brand recognition matters. So they're relying on brand recognition. But my initial look here, scrolling through, what I want to see is mention of Ukraine. Oh, here it is. Here's another one. Let's indulge ourselves. Let's see what this actually says. Okay. Aha, interesting. Caption of the picture, the Ukrainian Red Cross. Remember I said they decentralized? The Ukrainian Red Cross is not the same organization as the American Red Cross. They are structurally different. got. And their funding comes from different places. This article was written yesterday. I contributed $10 million to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Okay, let's pick that apart. This is why we check. And it can be as simple as just a couple clicks on a website. What this tells me is they did not give money to Ukraine. They want you to think that they did. This support allows Red Cross Network to provide life-saving aid to those in need, both in the country and in neighboring areas. They never said they gave money to Ukraine. Now, if we scroll down and read all of this, we might get additional information. Spoiler alert, we really don't. I've read it already. This attempts to give us specific numbers, which would meet the qualification that I set out earlier of getting specific statistics. But I can tell you that we don't really have any way of checking these numbers themselves. A lot of times we don't. But the difference between these numbers and some numbers that you'll find on other websites is the ease with which we find them. And a big red flag for me is how long it takes me to find these numbers. If I gotta really dig around, it doesn't look good for the organization because they should be presenting these numbers up front on their front page and updating them every day, or at least every week. Okay, well, let's come back to this sentence. This sentence does not say they gave money to Ukrainian organizations or that they're helping Ukrainians. What it says is they gave money to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, which is different from the International Council of the Red Cross. What we begin to see here is why the Red Cross is problematic. There are so many different organizations that have the Red Cross brand. It is almost impossible to know that your money actually goes where you want it to go. Okay, and I'm not talking about program versus administrative costs. That's a conversation I will circle back to. What I'm talking about is that money going to Ukraine, or is it just beefing up the Red Cross revenue statistics, which they may or may not use to help people in the immediate future? Theoretically, all the money goes to somebody eventually, but we're giving for Ukraine to help Ukrainians right now. It is almost impossible to verify with the Red Cross that that's happening. So that's what happens if you just Google the International Red Cross. Let's take a look at the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Click on their homepage. Ukraine's pretty far down. That doesn't mean they're not doing anything. It doesn't. Let's look at their emergency appeal. I am actually curious about this. The appeal already ended. Oh no, this is 2024. So it's still going on. Giving updates on things. Interesting. Again, there are some issues with this. And the reason there are issues with this is because the most effective Red Cross organization in Ukraine is going to be Ukrainian Red Cross. But what you will see if you click donate you're giving here to the international organization. If you click donate on the American page, you're giving to the American organization here. Right. If we go all the way back to the Support Ukraine page and we actually click the this button here, it takes you to a page of redcrossredcrescent.org/UA. UA stands for Ukraine. And it gives very little information, which is not encouraging. I would hope to see a little bit more here if it were me. What we do see here is a Ukrainian language option, and I don't love this because I can read this. Most of you can't. This is the Red Cross of Ukraine. But it's difficult. It looks like it goes straight to the Ukrainian organization, but it doesn't actually say that. Until it says that, I can't do it. I wouldn't, because just looking at how the Red Cross is structured, my overwhelming fear is that even this page will not go to the Ukrainian organization. It probably will. UA in the domain name, Ukrainian contacts here, but we don't know. So this brings me back to some of my initial recommendations. If you run into a situation like this, where technically if you dig enough, you can come across the pieces of information that I was highlighting to find, namely specifics, locations, statistics, stuff like that. So what about Ukrainian Red Cross, Red Crescent? Excellent question. Theoretically, good place to give. Theoretically. If I can find it, let me see if I can find it. Was it on Twitter that I saw this? We've already been to this site. Let's see. Red Cross Ukraine Twitter. Okay. Let's wait for it to load. Oh, interesting. This in and of itself is worth discussing. Red Cross, so they have a donate link on their Twitter page. This is the issue, right? So now I have further questions. An episode of Futurama that just raises further questions. This page, the astute among you will notice, is different from this page, which is the one that is linked on their Twitter page. This page, in 2 different languages, says that the website of redcross.org.ua is down. The unfortunate thing with a lot of Ukrainian websites is they are struggling with this. We're lucky in that our donation page is fine. It is secure. It has withstood any attacks. But we're running into this with this specific situation. We're running into this issue. So that makes me question even more whether this page actually goes to them. But the bigger question that you're asking is, are they actually a good organization to give to if you are able to give to them? I would say yes, but you have to make sure you are giving to them. After you do the initial checks of, again, let's take a look again at World Central Kitchen. After you do the initial checks, say you go here, and theoretically there's text on this page. There it is. After you go here and you click, okay, read more about their efforts, and you do the initial check of what the website says they're doing, you have to check the news. Because the Red Cross, if you ask them, says they're doing a ton. But intel on the ground says they're barely doing anything. Okay, so you have to take a look at this and say, oh, okay, they say that they're operating in this town. This is huge because this makes it really easy, theoretically, to check. So World Central Kitchen, Ukraine news has an easy little search. So you have a bunch of different news outlets here. Some decently reputable ones, NBC, Bloomberg. Bloomberg's not talking about World Central. Oh, it is talking about it? Why is it talking about Joe Biden and World Central? I don't know, whatever. Nation's Restaurant News, not one that I frequent, but maybe good. Checking on these news articles can kind of tell us, is what the website claims true? And we can come in here and just read a quick little news story, skim through it. I believe this is actually a video of him on the ground in Poland. That's pretty encouraging. Theoretically verified by a reputable news organization. I would suggest thinking about the motivation behind your donation and the impact you are hoping to support. Yeah, that's an important thing to do. Yeah. I know I have ad block. Go away. And everybody's going to have a different... Okay. Everyone is going to have a different motivation for giving. One of the reasons why when I initially sent out my first few emails at the end of February, what I said was, I will let you decide where your money is going to go. Because everyone is going to have a different thing they care about, whether it's children, elderly, disabilities, providing food, providing transportation. Everybody's going to have something different that they want their money to support. So that's another big piece of it, is just thinking, does this organization do what my priorities would be? Right? And that's going to be different for every single person. What I am attempting to outline is that you might very much believe in what the Red Cross's mission is. But when you're giving to emergency appeals and international orgs like this, especially, I mean, you always want to do these checks even for local orgs, but especially in situations like this, there's an extra layer of research that I think should happen. And I'm doing that research every day, so I'm a good person to ask for the first option. The first option being check with somebody who knows. Right? I'm a good source of information for that. But you might come across something that piques your interest, and either I don't know about it, or you don't have time to access or to ask me, or whatever it is. And so then you have to dig around a bit, and it shouldn't take you too long to do these initial steps. But let's see here. What else did I want to mention? Checking the news, I think, is an important second step of check the donation check the website and donation page, and then check the news to kind of verify as much as you can that they're doing what they claim they're doing. If you can do those two things, like we've just done for World Central Kitchen, they're probably decent. World Central Kitchen, by the way, I will tell you, I have on good authority, they're not actually everywhere in Poland, but they are funding local restaurants to provide food. So the money is flowing where we want it to go. I have a friend who was there on the ground recently and did confirm that. So if you're wondering about World Central Kitchen specifically, that's what I can tell you. Okay. So those are basic checks, right? I hope that all makes sense. If it doesn't, please stop me. I can circle back. I could also do a third example of direct relief, which was, in fact, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do another one here. Let's take a look at direct relief, since I did a fundraiser for them. And they're actually getting featured frequently on some other donation hubs as well. But just initially Googling, going through the process. I'm going to look them up. Googling, okay, direct relief. This is encouraging. They have in their Google search results a Ukraine page. Okay, let's go to it. Initial donate button, very prominently featured. Surprisingly, the same color as their background, which is an interesting design choice, but pretty standard practice to have that donate button front and center. Okay. Anybody want to guess if I like or don't like this page based on the initial scan of it? It's probably a bad thing for me to ask because of the stream delay. I like it. I like it because, let's look. Okay. Direct relief, the first thing they say is an amount of medical aid since the war broke out that they have provided. Strong start. Quick facts. Couple things up here just to give us some perspective on the problem. Very standard fundraising practice. And also good fundraising practice, by the way. And then it says this. Direct Relief is working with Ukraine's Ministry of Health. Love that. I love that. And the reason I love that is because who's going to know where the medical aid needs to go better than anyone? The Ukrainian Ministry of Health. Right? If you're looking for, as an international org, to coordinate stuff on the ground in another country, government ministries is a really good place to go. Obviously, that depends on the country. But as a general rule, you want to have an in-country partner that can help you coordinate where this stuff is going. They have the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health, good place to go. They're also working with other groups to provide requested medical aid. They don't really specify, but the Ministry of Health is enough to keep me on board. They then say, oxygen concentrators, critical paramedicines, longer-term assistance, people affected, displaced or affected by the war. Okay, good. We can keep going. Some news updates. And then you have this down here, which is sort of restating with a little bit more detail what was already said above. Also supplied Ministry of Health with hundreds of emergency medical backpacks for first responders, trauma infections, acute medical needs. They have some pictures here. I don't super love this, and this doesn't do a whole lot for me, except for the fact that they cited their source. But just the existence of pictures doesn't actually mean anything. It is way too easy to just take a picture of a random thing in a warehouse and say that it's for this. We see this all the time in news outlets trying to talk about political stuff. they take things out of context and pretend it's here. I don't think that's what Direct Relief is doing, because as you go through your levels of check with Direct Relief, they check out. They're good. Direct Relief rocks. I researched them for PayPal, and they do wonderful work. So there's confirmation from Jessica, my grad school friend, who knows more about nonprofits than I do. Direct Relief is a good organization. Again, you have to scroll a bit for this, but they've been progressively giving us more and more good information. So if you look down here, medical needs in Ukraine, they're giving all sorts of very good stuff listed in here. They also have this aid tracker, which, let me check my notes. Yes. This does update. It says updated 5 a.m. today. That's very encouraging. As someone who is overly paranoid about some of these things, I don't initially trust this because unaudited totals since January 2010 is meh. And updating at 5 a.m. today, it doesn't actually give you a date. So we don't actually know if today is today. But I did check yesterday, and I'm looking at it again now. These numbers have been updated. So they are actually updating these. But as a general check, if you scroll down and you see this is encouraging. This keeps me on board, because this means they're keeping track of it and they want to be transparent and tell us what they're giving to Ukraine. Checking needs to validate is a good step. Thanks. You're welcome. I think, that's one of those things that doesn't take very long, and I think it can be very useful. And if you look into Direct Relief, it does check out. And so I went through some additional steps verifying them, which I can cover a little bit later. There are official things you can do. Another thing, if you're looking to dive a little bit deeper into the organization, you can look at Charity Navigator. You can look at, I would go to the Finance and Policies page. Here's why this is my next step. After this page, right? After this initial Ukraine page, my next step is I go to About and I look for finances. The reason I look for finances is this is going to answer some of our other questions, like where do they get their funding? Right. Where do they get their funding and how is it used? Okay, so we know a little bit of how it's used from the previous page. This bit here is very interesting to me. Okay. As a rule, this would actually be a turnoff for me. Any organization that says 0% of your donation is spent on fundraising makes me want to dig deeper. I'm not saying they're trying to fool you. It just makes me want to learn what they mean by that. Because, take a little bit of a side journey here. There's a perception that your money should not go towards fundraising or administrative costs. There's a belief that has built up in our society that says my money should go towards programming. My money should only support programming. I don't want to pay for marketing or fundraising or any other stuff. The problem with that is somebody's got to pay for it. And as we mentioned earlier, if you don't market, your organization will not succeed. So supporting the marketing and fundraising of an organization is supporting the organization's programming. I know we want our money to go directly to the people. And in this case, I'm trying to find an organization that's more likely to do. But as a general rule for donating in an everyday situation, I would highly encourage you to not be discouraged if a certain percentage of that donation goes back into fundraising or marketing or administrative costs. Yes, so NGO analysis sites like Charity Navigator, that is my next stop. As soon as I finish this little bit, I will touch on that. So thank you for reminding me of that. I will make sure to dig in on that specifically. Okay, so to finish up this bit, so I don't forget to finish up this bit. Yeah, and then the employees tend to suffer because they're overloaded and underpaid. Exactly. You have to support the structure of the organization if you want the organization to succeed. So we're approaching this through a slightly different lens because it's an emergency response. But as a general rule, you have to understand that the nature of running an organization is money has to go to the non-sexy expenses. And administrative costs and fundraising are not sexy expenses. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I want to learn how they're able to pull this off. Luckily, it's a clickable link. That's encouraging. If something piques your interest and there's not immediately a clickable link to learn more, reason to hesitate, because that organization could be giving you more information about it. They obviously should be if it's something that piques your interest. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but this is encouraging that they're immediately willing to elaborate. So what does this tell us? Okay, this sentence means nothing. Since 2007, all direct relief fundraising expenses have been paid by the earnings from a generous unexpected bequest received that year and several other such legacy gifts since. Basically what that means is some people died and they left direct relief a lot of money in their will. Morbid, maybe, but useful. Money's got to go somewhere. And so, because they have that fund, again, something else we would want to check, but deep diving past this point, not worth your time. Okay, so we can take this and say, okay, now we know how they're funding that and how they're able to make this claim. That makes it a believable claim. The next thing that I see here is 0% government funding. Kind of want to learn about that too. Oh, wait, takes us to the same page. Okay, fine. Disclosure and recording. Great song. Thank you. I tried to be good at summarizing things. Okay, the reason I mentioned government funding is not inherently bad. Many nonprofits get government grants. It's one of the main sources of funding. Obviously fundraising, but because of the limitations on selling things for profit, hence the term nonprofit organization. Well, actually not hence the term, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that doesn't matter. Government funding and government grants are not inherently bad. However, it does mean that government agencies have an influence on what that organization does. You can fill in the blanks from there, but I was very encouraged by the fact that they don't have government funding. Because I want this organization to be able to go where it's needed and not have to answer to partisan or political influences. That being said, an organization that gets government grants and is trying to respond to Ukraine might still be an excellent organization to donate to. So government funding is not a reason to exclude an organization. I only bring this up to highlight that I am very encouraged by this organization not needing government funding. I did not mean to click on that. I really didn't. Wow. And you can read more about this. This is all interesting stuff that is worth knowing. But for my purposes, in setting up a fundraiser and trying to do so quickly, all I really needed to know was this. Okay, so that's how I selected direct relief. And the fact that they continue to update their statistical trackers on the website is encouraging to me, and I would and do continue to support them and their efforts in Ukraine. Okay. Since there was that question, and I don't actually remember when I was planning to get to it anyway, let's talk Charity Navigator and other such organizations. I'm going to close these tabs so that the RAM on my computer doesn't melt. Or just my computer in general. Let's talk about Charity Navigator. Okay. What were my notes on Charity Navigator? I had notes. I don't remember what they were. Right. Okay. So in a word, I would label... So Charity Navigator is one of a few sites that fall into the category of nonprofit watchdogs. That's a term that frequently gets thrown around. Just if there's another term that I'm not thinking of, let me know. But nonprofit watchdog sites are limited in their usefulness. The reason for that is they don't actually give you the information that you need to evaluate what we're attempting to evaluate here. I'll give you an example. Since Red Cross is the elephant in the room, we'll look at Red Cross. Immediately, what I notice here is we're only getting American Red Cross and Red Cross, whatever that is, and Red Crows. Excuse me? I don't know what Red Crows is. I don't really care. They also have a donate button on here, which is hilarious to me. Not surprising, but yeah. If you click on American Red Cross, just for the sake of pursuing the example, we've already sort of established that they're not the ones we want to be giving to, but let's pretend that we haven't established that, and we're looking at Charity Navigator because we want to know if the Red Cross is doing stuff in Ukraine. This doesn't tell us. It just doesn't. So Charity Navigator has a 4-star rating broken down into categories of financial and accountability and transparency. Additional beacons here. We'll talk about impact and results here in a second. And you'll see they have decent ratings, right? You would think that this rating in of itself, accountability and transparency, 100 out of 100 means great. I can give to them and not worry about where my money is going. Wrong. I'm sorry, but that's wrong. The reason it's wrong is, sorry, I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm trying to be entertaining. I don't think it's working. Anyway, if you go down here and you look, view details, and we see what accountability and transparency actually means, all this rating tells you, the only thing it tells you is, do they make information available? Do they tell you about their finances, right? Do they present financial reports? What do they do with their 990s? Or is there board compensation? It's giving you a little information about whether they make this information available, and they're giving you a very tiny bit of information about whether or not, like how they spend their money, sort of. But this doesn't tell us about programming, right? An organization might have fantastic programming, but a semi-low score on this. I've never seen it, but it's possible. The fact that they have a high score here is, I didn't know that these sites were called that, so I learned something. Personally, I feel these sites are clickbaity and don't give current accurate info. I'm pretty sure Renee called them Watchdogs at one point, and that's where I picked that up. It's what I call them, if nothing else. And yes, I would agree they are clickbaity and don't give current accurate info. It is encouraging that they have, 100 out of 100, right? But when you look at what that actually tells you, without deep diving into each and every one of these points, I can tell you that this information that goes into these ratings doesn't help you. It really doesn't. It's good that they have audited financial statements. It's very nice that they document their board meeting minutes. These are all good practices for a nonprofit, but it doesn't tell us if our money goes where we want it to go. If you go down to impact and results, by the way, it also doesn't really tell you anything. Impact, $670 provides an additional year of healthy life to a blood transfusion patient. Cool, I guess. But for my purposes, it means kind of nothing. So I would agree with the labeling them as a little clickbaity. I think they're useful as a check, a very quick check of, is this org terrible? But they provide such a small microcosm of information that you don't actually get anywhere beyond that. And I would say you would learn more from asking somebody who knows and reading the website and checking the news. It's going to take you maybe an extra minute or two to do that versus just looking on Charity Navigator, but I would say you would learn way more doing that. As a comparison, Charity, what was the other one? Charity Watch? Yes, CharityWatch.org. Here's another one. So they work a little bit differently. Not necessarily better, but a little differently. And American Red Cross comes up for Red Cross. They have, instead of a 4-star rating system, they have a letter grade system. And then they give you program percentage and cost to raise $100, which is effectively a fundraising efficiency percentage. And if you scroll down before I comment on that, I'll show you what else they give you. They give you a link to their websites, contact information, mission, information on governance and transparency. Interesting things to look at. But again, it doesn't speak to the impact and programming for what we're looking at. All right. So what do they give you here in this initial thing? Because from a web design standpoint, the first thing you see is very important. So the first thing I see here is an A-. First thing I see on Charity Navigator for them is they're only 3 out of 4 stars. As a comparison, again, don't rely too much on these sites is the takeaway, but as a comparison, let's take a look. Go magic internet. Wow. Okay. Direct Relief has 4 out of 4. As a comparison, just to put Red Cross in some perspective. This is a very limited evaluation of them based on information that the everyday populace is not going to be able to actually assess. Because what I'll tell you here is the stuff that they're talking about on Charity Navigator, as an example, all of this stuff, like program expense ratios and liabilities to assets, and unless you're actually trained in reading through nonprofit tax forms, doesn't tell you a whole lot. So you're sort of stuck with the initial rating of, do they have 4 stars or 3 stars? Do they have an A- or an A or B, or God forbid a C? C is average. Average is actually okay on a societal standpoint, but for rating organizations, it's not what I would want. I keep hitting my microphone arm and it's really awkward. The other thing I see here is something I want to highlight, because you may or may not hear a lot about this while researching organizations. Many people and many Watchdog websites and people who write articles about nonprofits, they will present program percentage as a thing. Now, this explains it as amount spent on programs relative to overhead. Overhead being those administrative and fundraising expenses we mentioned earlier. This number, cover your ears, boys and girls, this number is bullshit. I'm calling it what it is. These numbers and this number are so incredibly easy to manipulate from an accounting perspective that it doesn't tell you anything. Never mind the fact that this percentage doesn't tell you how effective their programming is. They could spend 100% of their money creating programming for homeless dogs. But if they can't find a homeless dog, it's useless. You see, that's a stupid example, but intentionally silly to prove a point. The amount of money you spend on the thing doesn't tell anyone how good you are at doing the thing. Add on to that the fact that you can basically lie about this number in your reporting. And it's not technically lying because it just matters how you do your accounting, which numbers you put where. So you might be totally truthful about your numbers, but depending on how you categorize them, which is up for debate, right? It is a thing that you can get creative with. This number is going to look totally different. The same organization could do their books two different ways and come up with a 95 and a 75 as an example. Right? It's not worth getting into the weeds of how they do that. But don't pay attention to these numbers. So Charity Watch and Charity Navigator, for me, earned very low scores on usefulness because they're presenting information that doesn't actually tell you what you need to know. I, as somebody with a master's degree, can go through and look at it and be like, this is kind of bullshit. Most people don't know that. This is your PSA. Don't listen to these websites. Use them as a basic check of, does this organization follow best practices for transparency, and move on, right? Because you don't want to support an organization that's not transparent. But in our evaluation for responding to Ukraine, that's not what we're focusing on. It's a factor, but we want to know where the money's going, which is where Red Cross falls short and what these websites do not tell us. I hope that makes sense. There are other websites. You might hear a lot about GuideStar. I have happened to have looked up American Red Cross and GuideStar the other night while prepping for this. GuideStar's fine. Are you serious? Gosh. All right. GuideStar is fine. We don't need to look at it. But GuideStar is more useful if you work in nonprofits. It presents information you can find elsewhere, just in a convenient place. And again, if you're not trained at looking at nonprofit financial statements, it's not super helpful. So I wouldn't pay attention to GuideStar and evaluating orgs for any more than I would pay attention to Charity Navigator or Red Cross. I did forget. You will notice on these websites, they have a donating tips page. Let's find out what that is. I was looking at this yesterday. I had not actually read through their donating tips before yesterday. And it can be tempting to go to websites that give donating tips. And I would generally recommend reading, as with anything that I'm going to research online, I'm going to read multiple websites and compare perspectives. But this one is an interesting example. aside from the fact that the word charity is outdated by at least a few decades, there's a reason why they're called nonprofit organizations and not charities anymore. It's more of a mindset reason than anything else, but we don't need to get into that debate. So aside from the fact that they still use the word charity, they are providing some information that may or may not be reliable. So here's my take on this for those of you who are interested. If you're not, bear with me here for a minute. I'll swing back to other topics here in a second. Generally speaking, these number point pieces of advice are good. Okay, know your charity. That's exactly what I've been talking about for an hour and 44 minutes now, right? Know your organization. Don't want to use the word charity. Never give to a charity you know nothing about. Request written literature and copy of the charity's latest annual report. Careful. Annual reports are effectively PR documents. They're useful. I will definitely 100% read annual reports when evaluating an organization. However, keep in mind they are designed to present the best side of an organization. So it's part of the branding process, in a manner of speaking. The reason these are good to look at is because it gives lists of actual information we want to know. Board of directors, mission statement, that should be on their website, but just in case it's not. Most recent available audited financial statements. I don't know if that's worth you digging into. I would argue it's not. Rather than digging into audited financial statements yourself, unless you're trained in reading financial statements, send me a message and ask me to check out their financial statements. I can look at them in 5-10 minutes and tell you my basic thoughts, aka a go or no go for donating. If they don't provide the information you request, you may want to think twice about giving to it. That is true. Next one, find out where your dollars go. If anybody's reading ahead, you already know what I'm going to say here. Ask how much of your donation goes for general administration and fundraising expenses, and how much is left for the programming services you want to support. Brother, come on. They're still pushing this idea that all of your money needs to go to the programs. If you don't support general administration and fundraising, if you don't support these things, the organization can't pay its employees. The organization can't market itself and get its name out there. Right? Now, here's another thing. The reason you don't care about this number is some of those expenses can be categorized as programming expenses. Right? If a nonprofit employee spends work hours, I have to go. This was fun to use my nonprofit brain. Y'all are in great hands. Bubbles being my gaming handle, has a wealth of experience and knowledge. Thank you, Jessica, for the endorsement. Thank you for hanging out and sharing your insight. Wish you well for the rest of your day. I will definitely be in touch. Thank you so much. So if a nonprofit employee spends work hours on programming stuff, where are you gonna allot their salaries? Right? Are you gonna put it under general administration? Are you gonna put it under a program? You see, it's like, and without getting too much into the weeds, the basic message here is all of these numbers go together. So trying to split them up is foolish. And too many websites try to do this. And this makes me question Charity Watch and Charity Navigator even more, because they're perpetuating myths that hurt the nonprofit sector. Again, that's my professional opinion. There are going to be nonprofit professionals that disagree with what I just said, but I stand by it. I really do. Other pieces here, semi-useful, give directly rather than giving through third-party websites or middlemen is more efficient and less risky to give directly to the group you want to support. That is true. You remember very early in the stream I mentioned don't give to fundraisers organized by people you don't know. In this case, I am a middleman, and the fundraiser for Ukrainian Volunteer Service, for which we have $30. I didn't notice, I didn't get a notification, but thank you to whoever donated. I very much appreciate your support. And apparently it does not auto update, but okay, getting back to this, kind of lost my train of thought there. I am technically a middleman, but I can tell you the website you would be donating to goes directly to the organization. And because I have direct contact with the organization, I'm less of a middleman than I would be otherwise. Plus, in situations like this, it is actually good to find someone you know who has a connection. So that really doesn't make them so much a third party as it does a trustworthy verification that your money is going where it needs to go. So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of that since it's not showing what I want to show. Keep records. Most of this is pretty much good. Don't be misled by a charity's familiar name. Again, I've sort of talked about that already. So these advice websites are good places to start as where to learn, but you can see there is some dodgy info. About to head out. Thanks for the good and useful info to think about. Good job. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions as you continue to go through this, you can contact me directly. I will probably wrap up soon here. I've covered most of what I wanted to cover anyway, so if you head out now, you're really not missing a whole lot. But I do hope this was helpful. There's not a whole lot else. The next thing to cover is just my full process for anyone who's interested in learning kind of specifically what I do. But I think at this point we've covered enough that might not actually be necessary. So yeah, if there are specific questions anybody has at this point about evaluating nonprofits, vetting them, understanding where your money goes, I'm happy to field them. I will open up sort of to the audience, to the viewers, to the chat, to anybody who's still around, to send some questions my way. But that's most of what I would cover. In summary, it is a matter of checking to make sure that they are connected with the event you are trying to help with. In the case of Ukraine, it is a matter of looking at an organization and seeing if they're actually on the ground working or if they're working with Ukrainian partners, and then verifying that with news sources. Even social media can be helpful because not so much the organization itself. They're definitely going to make themselves look good on social media, but there are probably going to be local social media pages and sources that could either verify or debunk claims of help, which is what has happened with the Red Cross, actually. So what happened with the Red Cross is initially, even though I don't like them because of the way they're organized and how difficult it is to sort of navigate all their stuff, I would have initially said, yeah, go ahead, give to the Red Cross. But within the last few days, some reports started coming out that the Red Cross was meeting with Russian officials, and they were trying to set up a new office in Russia. outside of the Ukrainian border. And then there were some pictures that floated around of the head of the ICRC, International Council for Red Cross, meeting with meeting with Russian officials. He also was meeting with Ukrainian officials, but that raised a lot of red flags because, he's meeting with someone like Lavrov, who has been one of the main mouthpieces for straight up lies about what is happening in Ukraine. So as somebody who knows the Ukrainian context, which I haven't talked a ton about the Ukrainian context specifically, just used it as a reference for judging nonprofits. But as somebody who knows the Ukrainian context and has been keeping an eye on the rhetoric coming out of Moscow and coming out of the mouths of people like Lavrov, that does not fill me with confidence that the International Red Cross is actually going to do something that's going to be useful for Ukrainians. So that was actually coupled with reports from Ukrainians saying, yeah, the Red Cross isn't doing anything. This is mostly off Twitter feeds and sort of secondary connections via social media of Ukrainians that we know on the ground. But it certainly seemed like the Red Cross was not really helping. And the Ukrainian Red Cross pages, interestingly enough, was spending a lot of time and effort trying to differentiate itself from the international wings of the Red Cross, because they don't get funding from them. They don't really get supplies from them. Not a whole lot happens between the International Red Cross and the Ukrainian Red Cross. So right now, I have not been able to verify any sure way to give to the Ukrainian Red Cross. If I do, I will share it. And if something comes out, news comes out that supports the Red Cross's case and makes them more legitimate to donate, I will happily update my recommendations. For now, my recommendation is don't give to the Red Cross. Be wary of international organizations until you can confirm their presence on the ground in Ukraine or Poland or one of the bordering countries. Or you can confirm the flow of money from them to local partners. A better solution would be to give to a local organization like the one I am highlighting here today. I need to get rid of my fundraising bar because it got moved. So today I'm raising, as you can see there's a link in the description. Let me put it in chat as well for those of you who are still around. So I'm there, in the chat, I just put the link for the fundraising page for the Ukrainian organization that I am personally connected with. I know the founder and CEO. They're based out of Odessa. They are pretty much on the front lines, doing a lot of good work, providing humanitarian, life-saving support to a broad range of Ukrainian citizens and coordinating efforts around the country. So this money goes directly to them. Those types of organizations are a lot harder to find. And from an American perspective, trying to donate, it can be difficult to give to Ukrainian organizations. This particular platform works internationally. And you'll see on the website, it has, it takes Visa, it takes credit cards, it takes Google Pay, Apple Pay, all of those things. So it's a lot easier to give here. And I fully support this organization. I can vouch for them personally. I'm going to head out, talk to you soon. Thank you, sir. Thank you for stopping by. Like I said, I hope this was helpful. We will touch base very soon. So ideally you would give to a Ukrainian organization to help with Ukraine. That's almost always the best option. What we will notice is there are several options for doing so. Okay, this is a government campaign to support the Ukrainian army. This is a Ukrainian organization that provides non-lethal aid to Ukrainian military. And Razum's not on here anymore, but there are some other ones that are available. And the one I'm highlighting here is one that's very, very easy to give. But beyond that, you don't initially find things. They exist, but it's hard to come across. So then you're going to be looking at some of these bigger World Central Kitchens, Save the Children. We've just talked about Red Cross and why they're problematic, but most of these other ones are good. You just have to take the time to look at their donation page, look at their appeals, find out how much specific information they're providing about what they're doing, and then verify that with news sources as much as possible. Or verify that with someone who knows the situation. So that's pretty much the summary. I could go on and on and on, but that's pretty much it. I think I was going to go into my personal process, which involves going and looking at the tax filings of the organizations, looking at the financial statements, and spending a lot of time sort of deep diving different aspects of information available for a nonprofit. But I don't think it's not an effective use of time for most people. So I'm actually not going to get into that. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field some questions. Otherwise, I will likely go ahead and sign off. The recording of this stream will be available. I will share it on Facebook as well. Try to timestamp some things to make it a little bit easier to navigate, so you can jump around to different topics and different questions that we tackled as necessary. But that's about it. I am happy to go through with anyone and look at specific organizations. If anyone had an example of an organization that they wanted my thoughts on, I'm happy to go through right now on my screen and in front of everybody and sort of pick it apart, take a look at it. But if not, we can call it here and go about our days. I do hope this has been useful. All right, folks. That's it. Not seeing any other questions in the chat. I will go ahead and head out. Just let me know if you think there's anything I missed, and y'all stay safe out there, right? Thank you. Have a good day, y'all.